I would like to call to order the special meeting of the school board for Community Union School District 303 on Wednesday, September 27th, 2023 at 5:31 p.m. Ms. Marsan, would you please take the roll call vote?
Yes, Mrs. Bell is absent right now. Mr. Kuschert,
Here.
Mr. Lackner,
Here.
Mr. Lentz,
Here.
Mrs. McCabe,
Here.
Mr. McNally,
Here.
Mrs. Fairgreen.
Here. Now Pledge of Allegiance. And there are no citizen comments at this time. So now moving to item 3 on the agenda. Can I have a motion to adjourn to closed session for the purpose of the appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of specific employees, specific individuals who serve as independent contractors in a park, recreational, or educational setting, or specific volunteers of the public body or legal counsel for the public body, including hearing testimony on a complaint lodged against an employee, a specific individual who serves as an independent contractor in a park, recreational, or educational setting, or a volunteer of the public body, or against legal counsel for the public body to determine its validity.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Lentz. And Mr. Lackner is the second. Ms. Marsan, would you please take the roll?
Mr. Kuschert,
Yes.
Mr. Lackner,
Yes.
Mr. Lentz,
Yes.
Mrs. McCabe,
Yes.
Mr. McNally,
Yes.
Mrs. Fairgreen.
Yes, motion passes 6-0. And just as a reminder, before we convene, the open session portion of our meeting will begin at 6:30 p.m. And with that, we will adjourn to closed session at 5:33 p.m. Okay, the board is now back in open session. It is 6:49 PM. Ms. Marsan, would you please take the roll?
Yes, Mr. Lecter,
Yes, here.
Mr. Lentz,
Here.
Mrs. McCabe. Here. Mr. McNally,
Here.
Mrs. Bell. Here. Mr. Kuschert
Here.
and Mrs. Fairgrave.
Here. Now we'll move to the for discussion section of the agenda. The first item of note is board meeting norms. And this is part of the board agreements that we actually established as of our retreat in July of 2022. So really just taking the opportunity, everyone should have had a chance to refamiliarize yourself with them as needed. So opening it up to any comments or feedback at this time. If there is none, then we can move forward.
And one of the pieces that I would offer with that was this, as Mrs. Fairgrave said, this was one of my first opportunities with the board at that time after I was hired on. And one of the board commitments and work with me was they wanted to improve the district, but the board also too wanted to continue to improve and grow as an organization, because we know the impact a board has on the rest of the organization. So that was one of the big goals. We want to go from good to great, but the board also wants to go from good to great as well. And prior in other boards, prior to my time, there were some struggles that were fairly evident. And that was one of the pieces that the board really pushed me on. It was like, how do we collectively work better together? And through that, it's where we came to, I brought these to the board of working through board norms, board agreements, recognizing that these are not, there's nothing ironclad here. There's nothing here that is I'm sending a note to Thomas or something, put you in discipline or anything like that. It's just kind of more that overarching, how do we operate? How do we do our work really well? And here's the good news, over the last year, couple of months, I think the board has done some really hard work, really big work, really important work. And it's to continue that partnership, because guess what? We have more big, hard, important work that is literally on our doorsteps right now. And for me, it's about looking at all these and saying, how do we continue to keep doing the good work we've been doing? And for me, that's the most important part of tonight. How do we continue to move forward? How do we continue to do good things for our students, for our staff, for our community that I think we have been doing? So I have just been super pleased with the board and where we're at, and how do we continue that step forward. But I'll hand it back over to Mrs. Fairgrave to her question.
So thank you for that commentary, Dr. Gordon. Any other comments? Okay.
Are we wanting to go through them or just agree, or I
No,
just
my
wasn't sure what you wanted?
Yeah, so my intention was not to go through them. My hope is that everyone had the opportunity to refamiliarize themselves if they needed to on the items on this list for board meeting norms. If anyone had any points that they would like to raise or comments, they can certainly do that at this time. Otherwise, we'll move to item B.
One thing that I just want to reiterate is that having a little bit of hearing loss, it's very difficult for me to hear the main speaker if there's any side conversation. So I really appreciate when there aren't side conversations, because it makes it just much harder for me to hear. And I really want to hear what everybody has to say.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we will go ahead then and move to item B on the agenda, which is board operating principles. Same approach here as well. I'm hopeful that everybody had a chance to review them again, perhaps, and would open it up for any comments or items that they would like to discuss for this.
My only comment is if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Okay. Okay, So with that, we will move on then to item C on the agenda, which is rules and responsibilities of the board and superintendent. We do have a document on that as well, which was created at that retreat in July of 2022. So any comments, items for clarification? Okay, very good. So these can continue for another year as is. Moving to item D, which is board superintendent communication expectations. We do have a document related to that as well, which is page 5 and 6 of the packet that you had. So are there any additional comments or clarifications, feedback related to this topic? Is that, I'm not sure, Mrs. Bell, is that a?
Oh, sorry, forgot. I'm just surprised nobody's having any comments about anything. That's just interesting.
Well, everyone certainly has the opportunity.
Oh, for sure. Agreed.
Okay.
Just surprised.
All right, so with that then, we will move to item E, which is related to our set board agenda items. I would open that up. I think Mr. McNally, you're going to initiate a discussion on that.
But yeah, the only, it's really a narrow concern, just that as we have agenda setting meetings and I'm present for those except for one where I was ill. But just when we're setting the agenda, obviously it's the job of the president to set the agenda with the input of the vice president. The only concern I have is standing items of that might have an impact on how how meetings are conducted. If it's a standing item, I had some comments we had some conversations with board members and 1 or 2 community members as well that expressed concern about that as a standing item. So about a standing item. So my concern really is just about the idea of a standing item that I would hope that we would just have a kind of a discussion with the board as a whole before we put something on as a regular standing item on that.
I can weigh in a little bit on this one. I think through some separate conversations, we've been talking about improving how we work with the various unions, right? In the last meeting, I was attending via Zoom. I missed the very beginning part with the purpose is and all the pieces of it. And I expressed some concerns about it. I thought perhaps it might be good, again, for getting a stronger working relationship. And the fact that we have multiple unions, that perhaps rather than an agenda item that's a little bit more free form, perhaps we set either a working group or a committee or assign an existing committee with the task to handle things, right? So the thing that immediately crossed my mind was we have all this great work that's happening in L&T related to the PLCs and getting the consistent feedback from the union and the crew there, I think might be helpful. But again, I don't know how that addresses the other unions that we work with as well. And so that was the concern that I had of having a forum that's a little bit more unstructured. I'd hope that the rest of the board we put some objectives to it and again, use it as an opportunity to build those relationships.
So I guess just a point of clarification, because I actually hear, and I'll just interject here if that's okay, Mr. McNally. I hear 2 different issues at play. Mr. Lynch's is a little more specific, and I guess yours was more broad-based. So I want to make sure and understand, are you requesting that something goes back to the policy committee specifically to address standing agenda items, or what is your thinking?
Well, again, my kind of narrow focus was just on the idea of I don't want to change the way agendas are set. What I don't want to have is like a one-time agenda item that we have that meeting, but once there's no more discussion on it, once we've made something a standing item. So I'd like really for the opportunity for something, again, if it's something of, especially something of import, even if I agree with it and think that it's a great idea, I think I'd prefer the input from the board if it's something we're going to be putting on as a regular item for an agenda, just so, I think, kind of hearing what Thomas has to say, it sounds like, maybe if we hash this out a little bit, we might come up with something that's an even better solution, because I know we want to have a good working relationship with all of our unions, obviously.
For sure. And for that particular point, that's
Yeah.
very well taken.
Yeah.
But I guess as I think ahead to even future presidents, I think that if you're wanting to stipulate something like that in place, then my recommendation would be that it goes back to policy if the board concurs. Otherwise.
Yeah,
we
again,
maintain
and
the
it's
same policy.
right. So I guess I was just pointing out why I felt as I did that kind of pointed up one of the things that might have come out of a discussion about as a way to address the specific concern that he has. If we had a policy in place that said, hey, we talked about this first, then we might have heard that as a solution, as opposed to this sitting as a standing item.
Exactly. So are you proposing to the board that this goes back to policy?
Yes.
Does it need to be policy? I'm confused because I don't think we have,
It is in policy
it's
today.
policy for standing items to be reviewed. I'm sorry.
It's
go to
agenda
policy.
development. It would just be under the agenda. It would be, that's where we would approach that, where the board president has that responsibility of setting the
Okay.
agenda. So they
That's what you're
fall
talking
under that.
about.
I
Okay.
don't have the policy on top of my head,
Okay.
but that's where we
Yep.
could have some.
I don't know that
nuance.
it's specifically addressed, I think is.
It is,
and
well-
so.
It is specifically addressed in policy
In the
today.
rules.
If we want to further refine that and have it where it's standing agenda items or some fashion of that, we can certainly do that. So that's why I'm trying to facilitate
Yeah.
direction.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry.
Well,
Mr.
I was just going to say,
Lockwood.
there's two different kinds of agendas that we work. There's the regular board meeting agendas and the committee agendas. We have a very informal discussion about agenda items at the conclusion of committee meetings today. And there are what I would call, this is a little bit of a oxymoron, temporary standing items, for example, associated with facilities in the business services, or currently within both L&T and facilities discussion about the boundaries issues. This is a bounded set of challenges with which the board has to deal, but it spans multiple months. And so we have a usually spoken at the board table agreement during that closing of the committee session about the fact that those items will show up again on the next committee meeting. And I think that's one way to handle kind of the standing items. And then when we think about regular board meetings, we typically have we typically think about the committee reports as standing items, but technically they're not. They're just, we agree that we need to cover those things. And so I think that's the distinction might be worth talking about in policy and say, is there a different process for standing items or not? And what does that even mean? Because the example in committee is, hey, we've got one thing we're grappling with that is expansive in terms of the calendar, but time bound. And then there are other things that will happen perpetually. The reason I bring up the distinction is that even the existence of committees is appears perpetual. It is not. It's a decision that we make to have the committees that we have. So I think it's worth having a conversation in policy about the specific issues and how those are addressed.
Okay.
And then what I would interject to Mr. Lentz's point, that's something that what I would like to have an opportunity to take that on, your topic on, and potentially one or two other board members join. So where we grapple with a solution, and then we bring that back out to the full board for further conversation about what that looks like, share that in a weekly update or something along those lines, where myself and a couple of board members think about more specifically the union conversation on the agenda, and can we figure out a different way or a better way of approaching that. That would be my recommendation to the team.
With
And I would certainly volunteer to assist with that.
I think that sounds like a.
Me
Yes, I
too.
would like to do that too.
You're gonna have all of us
Yeah.
want to volunteer.
Well, those of us that have less committees,
On
maybe.
that note, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't.
No,
mean
I'm
to-
just saying those of us have less committee appointments. Anyway, I'm kind of joking. Maybe is this a better, do we also want to think about that? Maybe is it a better location to do this setting is the word for a board meeting or for a committee where we have more open dialogue? Or does the board not see that as a difference? Maybe having various committees because then it's not all on one night, whereas maybe educators could come, the education union could come on L&T, maybe business services for the facilities. I don't really know. I'm just throwing that out there.
This, just based off of my history, I think it would be better if we did the initial work a little bit behind the scenes to bring it then back to
Yes.
either a committee or the board. So the whole board has the opportunity to engage in it. I do not want to limit any board members from it, but I would like to do some drafting behind the scenes with 2 board members. So again, we meet the OMA requirements and then we bring it back out to the full board for a full, robust conversation on the best way to approach that. But I'd like to do some draft thinking behind the scenes.
And I'd just like to voice the intent, which I think is what I assume all of us are at, is how do we strengthen our relationship with our associations and that communication? And I think that part, no matter who is working with you, Dr. Gordon, that the idea will come back to the board with that this will strengthen our relationships.
And to both Heidi and Tom's point, this going forward for other boards, eventually not all of us will be here on the board anymore. And I think that it's really good to put that in policy or in precedent so that there is a long-term commitment to building a relationship and collaboration. So it's not just, we're going to do it for this group of years. I think that would be really key.
Okay. All right. So with that, we can move to item F, which is the data dashboard.
Ms. Mars, would you hand out the colored one first? So board, I think most will remember, we had a robust conversation on the success criteria a few weeks ago, really specifically, and where this is honing in, I'm not bringing you the full success indicator dashboard that we did the first time. We're really honing in on the SAT conversation. So through that robust conversation that we had that night and follow-up conversations with different individual board members that I had, we really came down to, if you would flip to the 3rd page, that will look like this with the heading Class of 2023 SAT Super Score. So we really came down to a SAT distribution chart. And there's a lot of information on this distribution chart. And again, just from a high level, this obviously won't fit on that pretty little piece of paper that I had before. We're probably going to have to turn this more into an electronic success indicators, just a little bit more in the weed stuff, but that's stuff that we're going to have to do. But what you'll see here, Dave Shazar did this, is literally lay out our SAT scores across our district. As you see, just overall, our scores tilt a little bit to the right, which is a good thing. The 2 large points or lines within this is the 1080, which is under the success indicators. That's one of our ABC success indicators. And then the 1250, which is in the board's aspirational goals that you'll see really highlighted in the SAR report coming in November. So both are critically important to us. They do 2 different jobs. The success indicators, just remember the health of the overall organization. When we start to look at what are the percent of students who are meeting each of those in EC all the way down to high school. So 2 very different whys behind this, the scores. Where the 1250, the board set those goals, took final action on them last year, but were instituted, I think, a year and a half ago, somewhere around there, but were finally adopted last year. And again, those are really represented in our SAR report that you will see there. Within this report, you're also going to see some color coding. We're gonna go under the quartile colors. This is where those scores end up in. What's that quartile? What's that percentile that students are reaching within each of those? So I'm just gonna go to the an SAT score of a 1020 to an 1150. So that's from the 51st to the 75th percentile. So that's what that shows the community, the board, and others if they were to look at that. On the right-hand side, you will then see a lot of different descriptors. How it currently is coded, if you went to the top of the scale, those are highly selective universities. Those are the type of scores that students are achieving to get into those highly selective schools. You know, a little bit of research on that. It is a small percent. You're roughly right around 6% of all students get into highly selective universities. And then it goes from there into generally accepted, highly selective, generally accepted, selective. And then you start seeing some ISBE exceeds. You jump through there to that 1050, top of typical average range in acceptance to college. So you'll just see some different indicators. I think it allows the board and the community to have a sense of what these SAT actually mean, because oftentimes you just throw out numbers and people are like, I don't know what that has a connection to my kids or why you're doing it. I think this adds a little bit more value. I don't know if we're all the way there yet, but I feel like we're closer. And again, this is draft. This is literally what we wanted to bring it back to the board to say, where are we at? So I'll stop and I'll turn it. Oh, there are also a couple other pieces. So if you would take that top one, thank you. There are some questions around how many times do our students take the SAT? We had a really good conversation on there. Interesting, 74% of our students take the test only once. 26% take it multiple times. You see the points gained after multiple attempts is 15. And again, that's average. Some kids are much higher, some kids are much lower, but there is some increase to the overall net. So it's a 15-point gain for those 26% of students who retake it. And again, we have students who will retake it out of that 26% 2 times. We have somebody who's chosen to take it 8 times. But that's up to our individual students and how they want to do that work. But that was a request by board members to see where are we at on that one. Let me just get the last one in, I think. Really and then we did another distribution chart that says at the top, class of 23, last SAT taken. So it's really a representation of the sheet that I just showed you. That
Their last SAT or their super score?
This is their last SAT
Okay,
taken.
thank you.
So that's not a super.
No, it's just their last SAT taken. Thank you for that clarification, because the other one was super score.
And I
think
and
I
I
got it.
apologize.
No, you're good.
So the one that says class of 2023 SAT is the state test. What is that?
So that's the required April test in the state of Illinois. Everyone has to take that test in their window.
That's our
As a
students
junior.
during that-
Yes, thank you for that clarification.
During that mandated test.
Correct. As a junior, they're mandated to take the SAT in that April window. So that's that notification. Thank you for that.
I was one of the individuals who requested some of this, so this absolutely satisfies a number of the questions that I had. The data representation is easy to understand as well. I think it's pretty clear. So I'll dive a little bit deeper into the details, but this appears to be a very nice addition.
Perfect.
One thing I wanted to call out is in the distribution, it becomes really clear when you look at the quartile colors, and I know we have two color schemes here, but the quartile colors, 1160 is the cut point for determining third or fourth quartile. So students who scored above that 1160 are in the top 25% of all students who take the test. And when I look at that as almost the midpoint between our 1080 and our 1250 goal, that feels about right, because it tells me that we're working all parts of the student population challenge. It says, you know, we want to work all parts of this curve and pull everybody a little bit to the right on it. And so when I look at that 1160 and then Dr. Gordon, I appreciate your comments about the 1080 and the 1250, because the more kids we get to the right, the better. And now we're looking at it and saying, hey, a lot of that is to pull kids into that top quartile, which opens opportunities for them. And so I think it's a healthy way for us to look at the SAT data.
It's also, just to add on to that, there's a nice way to see the impact of taking the exam multiple times, at least on average, right? So that can be useful information for students, for parents to say, hey, on average, you can improve your score by this. So if you're at a threshold near or where you need to be for the institution that you're applying to, it may be beneficial to them. This is data that I wasn't aware of. And so perhaps it's worth that second attempt or third attempt if a student is seeking a higher score, even if it's just subtly higher.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point, because I didn't know that data either. So the board's conversation informed all of us at a deeper level. I think one of the pieces that Dave Shazar, I'd be remiss if I didn't say, you know, that 26% of who are retaking it, there's some bias there because of all the things that you said. There's some goals, some aspirations for why I want to take that. And sometimes we don't know what those are. You know, I think we can make a pretty strong hypothesis is I want to improve because I want to go to X school. And I know this score will help me. So you do have some students who are really pushing hard to improve on that score, but it's more information for us to, you know, ask deeper questions on.
So I find myself doing this, wishing if it was 30 years ago and I had hesitated over that. I'm not dating myself, I know, but because I what's it?
Oh, your microphone.
I'm sorry. So I was saying that I'm looking at this and trying to do the see-through to see how much did it shift to the right when we went from 23 as a state test to last SAT taken. Was there a significant shift to the right? And because that was kind of what people are obviously hoping for. And there's also, you know, the kind of indication that perseverance is a plus.
I want to say I appreciate the descriptions, especially kind of breaking it down. I think that'll be a real benefit for the community to be able to see that. And then again, to Mr. Kushert's earlier point about, hey, where do you want to go? I think it's very valuable for some of those conversations. So thank you.
You know, and again, for our parents, our counselors are outstanding at having these really great conversations about the basic kind of that, what is that composite score? What's that average score if I want to go to this school? And that's also readily available. Mr. Kushert would know this as his former life on the school's websites. But this then kind of together, to your point, is useful information as a student and as a parent to really understand what is Illinois, you know, University of Illinois, what's their composite score? What's the average acceptance? And recognizing there's some different factors that go into every score. But at least it gives our families and our students a pathway to have those conversations. So I love that point.
I also think I totally agree. I think it looks good and the descriptions are important. I also think, I've said this many times, that middle school parents should be seeing this because you can't wait till your junior year and your counselor says to you, this is what you need to get. So that ability to have a runway to your goals and aspirations, I would really recommend that we continue to push towards informing our kids before they get into the high school, especially the families so they know what goals they want to set for their kids.
Yeah, I
One
really
thing-
appreciate,
Oops, sorry.
go ahead.
One thing I would say is that the counselors do it, the teachers can do it. I know that for my family, Tina King, my kids just asked what their mathematical pathway is, and teachers are amazing. They're probably willing to also say, hey, I see you like X, Y, and Z, and maybe this class in high school would be really good, to Becky's point about middle school. Both my kids had a roadmap from 5th grade. So that really helped them pick and choose. And so I'm advocating for what you're saying, either the counselors do that or teachers. I mean, kids have a lot of resources that they can tap into. And that's us offering all these pathways, but I think it's really important to have that roadmap in middle school.
And
I
I
was
know
just
I
gonna
just
say-
gave this, oh, so go for it.
I was
Sorry.
just going to say, I appreciate your point. And in the former life that you were speaking to previously, I actually used to come to Redling Middle School and talk to them about what to do now to prepare for high school, to prepare for admission into college. So it's so funny that you mentioned that. And I wonder if the district is still have some relationships with local colleges and universities that come and speak to our middle schoolers. But it was a unique, I did it annually for a few years when I was in that realm.
And I know this was just given to the board, so I'm not looking, if board absolutely wants to take this and then send me feedback via email, but what I'm hearing, we're in a pretty good space, minus some potential minor tweaks here and there. Would that be?
Yeah.
All right.
Just, I do want to ask one
Ask away.
quick question. I was thinking about, like I said, an acetate overlay. Obviously, I'm not getting that.
I don't think
Because I
so.
don't think we can buy it anymore. But would it be an onerous task for them to do some sort of an overlay of these? Just, I'd like to see.
Overlay of, it's,
Shifts.
Yeah, the shift
How-
from
but-
the state test to the last SAT taken.
Just the
Would it
graph.
be more telling to look at the shift with the super score though? Because that's the true score that's going to the
Yeah.
colleges.
Yes.
Yeah, I guess I really hadn't thought, right. So I guess I was just looking at it and I get, it's not necessarily the same cohort of kids. So, I mean, it's the same cohort, but it's not always the same kids doing the.
Right.
So, yeah, that probably makes more sense.
are we good?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think Mr. Lynn says something.
Oh, I did. So I brought it up in the last meeting when we were talking about this. I want to follow up on that. Looking and comparing some of the stuff to our, the state scorecard, right? One of the items on there was teacher attendance. And that was one that I had some questions about, like, how often are we reporting that to the states? I'm sure it's probably an annual dump, right, that goes to them. But that might be something that, I wanted to bring to the board to, again, see, how we're performing. Got a little with my gestures here, how we're performing just as a district. Because again, the teachers being present in the class I think some of the research has said that is an indicator in continuity of learning, a number of other things that it impacts. And looking at the state scorecard, we've been a little bit on the decline. 2020 was shockingly, I think it was probably the remote piece of it was a kind of a high water mark for us. Right. And then the numbers on the state scorecard, it kind of shifted. So that's one thing that I thought might be beneficial for us to talk about. And it might even be for the working group that we were discussing earlier. But I wanted to bring that up because looking at it, we were at 90.6% in 2020, 2021, we fell to 85, 2022, we were at 62 point something. So it's like a pretty significant drop off there.
Let's study that because I have a lot of questions. Some of it is based, we have contractual agreements, so we have to be, I think we have to be very cognizant of that. What are you exactly looking at? Are you saying the attendance of our teachers is at 60%?
So I believe this is the Illinois report card,
Okay.
right? And it is on if I look at the trends tab here, under teacher attendance. and again, I don't know if this is maybe a data issue, right? I also don't know from a reporting perspective. That was also kind of some of the clarity that I wanted to get as well, is how often are we reporting this out? Is this something that could be available to us as a board, right? That we could proactively work, and, you know, if there is some issue that's causing teachers to be out, you know, to proactively work through that with representation or, you know, whomever else. But it was the other reason is it was a little jarring to see that fall off. And I don't know, again, if it was a data issue or if it's something else or what it's based on. So that's why I wanted to bring it in the data discussion.
We've certainly discussed attendance of students, right? So this is something that is predictive of student success, and it's certainly worthy to look into it if we have in fact the correct data.
I guess my view, excuse me, I would I'd like to understand how the data has been reported. I'd like to understand how the absences are defined. I don't have an appetite to be looking at it on a monthly basis on the dashboard because they have benefit time that they are given per their contract. And I don't think it should be part of our agenda to try and address how they're using their benefit time, because that's a contractual item. That's my view. I do think, though, we should understand how the absenteeism in that report is defined and then understand, is that an accurate?
We
figure?
can
Because I don't
absolutely do that.
remember. Okay.
I would concur with Mrs. Fairgrave. I do worry that this could put the board in a place of potential concerns by the association because of these are their benefits and they have a right to utilize their benefits. So I think it could be part of a smaller working group to think through, but we can absolutely get you the data. How is this reported? What are those mechanisms that we send up to the state? Because I don't know if I assume it's just an annual data drop, but I can ask more.
And even why Illinois report card deems that as a necessary variable to give out to the public and to address, right? Maybe there's good reason for it. And certainly we wouldn't be trying to infringe on anybody's rights to utilize their time. That's their time for a reason. But I would say Illinois report card's probably putting it on there for a reason. And maybe we could find out if our data is accurate, if we've submitted it appropriately, and why they reported.
And it's an absolute true statement that you said earlier. The research is clear. When the teacher's in the classroom, we have greater success. So I think that is that research is clear.
True.
Yeah.
I can tell you.
We have amazing teachers. And the more times our students with our amazing teachers, the better our students are their overall outcomes gonna occur.
So on that note, I will say that the discussion can take a lot of directions. Previous district I was affiliated with, they, based upon that very notion of the more the teachers are in the classroom, the better students tend to perform, they incentivized teachers utilizing those days less. They provided incentives by quarter. Incentives were provided. So that could be part of a discussion. It doesn't have to necessarily be a negative discussion.
Is this something that normally falls under the purview of the board, or is this getting into the weeds? Is it more of an admin thing? I'm just not sure.
This is negotiations.
Yes. So then this would not be open session conversation.
I think we're walking a really tight line here. I'm sorry.
I'm a little uncomfortable. as
I
well.
don't think this is an item that should be on the dashboard. You're going to open up a can of worms that I'm not sure is appropriate for us because we have negotiated a contract. And I hear what you're saying, but we have negotiated a contract, and if we're going to change that, because there are other items we could look at about teacher time in front of kids. But I think looking at absenteeism is going to take us in the wrong direction. I'm willing to have you move it to a behind the scenes discussion and bring us back whether the data is accurate or not. But I can tell you that I'm not interested in counting the days of absenteeism when that's part of their benefits.
seems more like an HR department thing, not that the board, I would certainly want to know, make sure that we're reporting things accurately to the state,
Yeah,
obviously.
So
But that's where my interest would.
So I think what I'm hearing is a first step is that we at least need to understand the data as it's reported. So Dr. Gordon will take that away. He'll understand the definitions and also be able to track to the accuracy of what's submitted
That's what I
and
heard.
then bring that back.
That's what I'll do.
Okay.
All right, Ms. Marsan, would you hand out the next one? So one of the other questions that were asked were the number of AP tests students were taking. So we have that data for you as well. It's not as clean. Again, it's super small. So I hope you either have your glasses or you have your 20/20 vision with you here tonight. I have neither. Yeah, I didn't grab one either. Thank you. So if you look at those top boxes, yeah, it's the count of AP students taking the number of AP tests. So these are unique students. So the students in that I took 2 tests are not part of the students who took just 1 test. These are, so it's just super clean. And then across the board, it's the class of. So it's the 2023 class of. Those are the students who've taken that number of AP scores. And I apologize for how small the font is on there. But this was another interesting data dive for us as the board was requesting. Because again, I'm just going to go back to try to connect it back for our community members who are listening to the board. And our success indicators. One of their indicators is if a student takes 1 or more AP dual language industrial credits, that will put you, if you just took the 1, we're going to put you on our yes, you're in that percentage. Board members were like, what are the numbers of our students taking 2, 3, 4, or 5 or more? And oftentimes when they're the 5 or more, these are students who are doing this, who have not even taken the class. And they're like, I'm going to go try this other test. And that's certainly available to them. So the kids are, you can see there is a number of kids doing that type. They just want to try and see if they can score the passing rate. Down below, the other question was, what's the rate of AP tests that are being passed? So you go down there, and again, it's by the grad class. So those who are taking the 1, 52, you would assume that it would probably be going up for students taking more, into that 62.8. If I'm taking 3 tests, 71, 4, 73, 5, 80%. For the young people who are taking 8 or more, we're sitting in the 92% range of the pass rate. So I know that was some kind of that behind the scenes information that the board wanted to investigate. Questions on that? Did we hit the spot there?
There's some pretty big jumps between 1 and 3 in terms of pass rates. And I think there's probably something worth exploring there. And then, one of the things I think this brings, when I see the pass rates and I see some of the potential successes, one, when we have students with 12 or more who have 100% pass rates, those are some pretty bright kids and they're working really hard. So that's pretty impressive. The other bit is, we had a conversation about the potential for some of our math program to include an AP pre-calc class. And I just wonder when I see one AP test with a 52% pass rate, which means half kids pass the AP test, half don't, how we think about the expansion of AP as a part of our programming. And so that's my first reaction. But to your direct question, I appreciate seeing this information. Thank you for sharing.
Absolutely. And then to your previous question, I think one of the pieces through that AP audit, what we were finding is, are there certain courses that students have a grade and a pass rate that are more similar? Or are there some that are dissimilar? And I think those are some real, kind of going to Mr. Lackner's question. I think that's, the data just allows us to ask more questions, to see and start uncovering what's going on in certain courses where potentially we have a high pass rate, but potentially a lower pass rate on the AP, and what's going on there. I think it just allows for more conversations, more things to dig into. So I appreciate the board's ask on this. It's super interesting. And as Mr. Lackner said, the two young people who have taken 16, like, you go. So if this again was more behind the scenes backup data for the board, this would not be on the data dashboard itself, but more information for the board to have as we start digging deeper and deeper into this.
Is this something, Paul, that we were considering for the SAR? Would that be helpful at year end to include this? Because I do think it is really noteworthy to see as students attempt more and more rigor, we see increased performance, right? And I think that might be noteworthy for our SAR.
That's what Christine and I were thinking. The data dashboard itself is getting to be super full and running out of space every minute. We thought this would probably be more appropriate in the SAR to be able to, very similar to how it'll be much cleaner and with the graphics more easily read. But we felt like in this form, that would be an appropriate place to put it in there in that section around AP.
I'm sorry, I'll have.
No, you're good.
There's a sentence here that says there are students who take AP tests, but not the AP class.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. It's a number of students in that 5 or more there are students 9, 10, 12. I mean, the number goes to 16. So there was two young people.
I was wondering how they got it all in their day.
Yeah, it's incredible what they're doing. So yeah, so the data, again, super interesting to see that, as Mr. Lackner pointed out, there are some young people who are just rocking and rolling out there and really doing exceptionally well. So that was what I had brought forward for the success indicators. What we would do, again, open to any other email feedback that you have for me, especially on the SAT, especially on the SAT distribution chart. If there's some nuance there, please send that to me, because what we're needing to do then is handing this over to the communications team and seeing how we're going to publicly display this, because it's not going to be on the document we brought the previous time, because it would be too hard to be able to read the data. So please send those to me.
Okay, so with that, we will move to item 6, which is adjournment. Can I have a motion
I have
to
a quick question. Can I stop you? I'm
Yes.
sorry. When we're reviewing all the other items, not the data dashboard, but all the other items, what will actually be what will be the procedure or policy when we have issues or someone disagrees with that, or they're not adhering to one of those? I mean, what are we going to do as a board? Or what do we normally do? I don't know.
Well, I can only speak to my experience and past practice. So if it's an interpretation of a policy or a disagreement with a policy, that would revert back through the policy committee
Okay.
and go through those chairs. If it is something more unique or
Like agreements or norms type of
individualized,
thing.
you would come to the president. That's
Okay,
historically. what
perfect.
it's been.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, can I have a motion to adjourn the September 27th, 2023 special board meeting?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. McNally. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Lentz. Ms. Marsan, please take the roll.
Mr. Lentz,
Yes.
Mrs. McCabe,
Yes.
Mr. McNally,
Yes.
Mrs. Bell,
Yes.
Mr. Kusher,
Yes.
Mr. Lackner,
Yes.
and Mrs. Fairgrave.
Yes, motion passes 7-0. The meeting is now adjourned at 7:38 PM.